bring up our chair of Data Dictionary, Rob Larson.
All right, let's see here. We got mics aplenty. If I can figure it out. It's like it's taped on. All right. We've got a clock down here. There's me and my guitar. More important, there's my information if you want to contact me. And here's what we're going to be covering today. We're just going to go ahead and dive right on into it. So usually at meetings, I'll cover process. There's been times where I even, pull up Confluence and kind of walk you through adding things. What I'll tell you this one is just a quick overview. If you need any assistance, you can reach out to info@reso.org. Really, the process is open. You can just go to Confluence and post. You can contact me and ask me what I think about it. I'll help you do some research on the history of the topic. We want to get it vetted out. Topics need to be not based on the thing you've got, but because someone else has it, right? So we're creating a standard. So if you kind of catch yourself on that up front, might stop me from sort of saying, hey, wait, our first thing's going to be is find somebody who has this. So if you have that lead work, but we're going to do it anyway, even if there's two. We really want to drum up participation so that we can make a more inclusive standard at the end of the day. And then we'll get her, it's dinging at me and it's only 30 seconds. We want to get a well-vetted, kind of complete idea out. Not a requirement. If we're not really sure on something, we can go to the community and say, hey, what do you think? Again, there's not really a whole lot of hard, fast rules. If you want to just go post direct to Confluence, go for it. Knock yourself out. It's not a problem. One thing that we'll go through, is that we've got to get the post. It's got to be up for a little while before it goes to the work group. We really want participation on that post. We want conversation, right? Again, it doesn't always have to happen. It depends on the topic, but some of them we even say, hey, wait a minute, we need more discussion around this. And then with a lot of the tools and things that RESO's been building, we're more and more in a position to evaluate impact. So I want to change the name of this field, and it happens to be list price. Well, impact's probably going to be 100% for all MLSs and all consumers of MLS data. And so that'll be an important factor for the work group to recognize. And then they can say, hey, is this really justified given the impact? And then after the work group votes it in, we're targeting to kind of wrap things up in the fall for every version. So everything we're doing right now is 2.1. 2.0, aka 1.8, is already gone through review, and we're now in the process of getting it deployed. So right now, all the discussions we're having are on 2.1. October, when we have our meetings, whenever that is, if we can vote to close that package, that's the goal. Then we can go into comment over the winter, and then we can get the board ratification in the first quarter. And we've varied on that pace for different reasons. We want to try to set that pace annually now so that everyone's got expectations around that clock. So with regards to the process and all that, any kind of questions, observations, any input? This is a work group. It's not a lecture. All right. So, structure of how the dictionary work group, we still do our usual thing. We still have posts, we review it. But the dictionary work group has become almost like an umbrella organization. Whenever we have deeper topics, we're spinning up subgroups more and more often and getting subject matter experts in there, smaller groups. So if we're talking about commercial, there's a lot of us who have commercial in our real estate, in our residential real estate systems, right? Well, one of the groups you'll see here is truly commercial. It's getting subject matter experts to the table and having those smaller work groups where it's more about everybody in that group really pitching in. And I have this, I'm sure I got this out of a book somewhere. 5 to 7 are your effective numbers, right? We really want to get that 5 to 7, dream team going after these topics, so we can really, have that SME focus and results. And we're able to do a lot of stuff, as you'll see, at the same time. So right now, update on commercial. Group is formed, group's been active, group has submitted metadata. If Jason looks like he's tired, it's because he's been mapping like a fiend. We've got a lot of submissions, so it's a lot of work bringing all that together. Current status, we've got all of them mapped up to the existing RESO sort of standard type of names, although this is a whole new resource. This is not residential, this is CRE. And we're doing the work, or Jason's doing the work, gotta give him all the credit on this, around mapping those that will become the new standard fields to create this whole picture. So that's moving along. If you haven't been involved and you feel you can contribute, you can certainly join in. But at this point, we're pretty far down the road, but it certainly would not hurt to have an observation to say, hey, you're missing this, that, or the other. The appraisal subgroup. So Anthony has picked this one up. A lot of relationship to tax. And when you talk appraisal, something that's a little bit different about this one, and getting into a little bit of a blast to the past for me, is that MLS and appraisal systems consuming that data, sure, we actually have a couple points to review on that with the group, but to lender is coming back up. So this group hasn't really officially completely formed at this point, but there's been lead work. Anthony's been contacting Mismo. We've gotten a hold of, if you folks remember Liz Green from back in the day, she was very active. So she's back into being involved. So getting lending involved is part of this discussion going on. So if you have interest in there, please come join. We'll just be getting started after we get this initial research done. Tax, a lot of work already done, a lot of tax systems submitted. We could always use some more. We're in the mapping phase right now. We're actually kind of rebooting this group. So it went dormant for a little bit, but we're picking that ball back up. And so if you have a tax system, if you're a tax aggregator, come on down. We could still use your metadata. But right now with what we have, it's pretty healthy, so we'll definitely be moving forward. Rental. So I was just talking to the guys. This is a model for a really good mapping job. I mean, this spreadsheet is absolutely stellar. And of course, it's thrown into RESO, so you could always take a look at it if you want to see a really good mapping document. But we've got good submissions. The group is moving along. We're pending completing that work, and then we'll be spinning up a meeting possibly in May to start reviewing that work and making any adjustments and final decisions. This one, I've got 2 volunteers. I know this isn't the most exciting topic, but would definitely love some more participation. So you can email me, you can email info@RESO, you can go to Confluence, just put your name in the hat. Right now, with just 3 of us, basically, it's just not enough to move forward. We got days on market done. Participation was really good with that. But we need to move on and get days in MLS done. And we've got a couple others to do as well for this very long project of many parts. Frontage, kind of a new one that came up. This started with an inconsistency with frontage and waterfront. So the group's going to sit down and look at those and just take a look at what maybe a balancing out between the 2 fields would be, because there's a little bit of crossover with them. There's also discussions going on around water features. And this may blossom into a larger conversation. So initially we were thinking this would be a very short, maybe 1-2 meeting group. But if it blossoms into water features, we start talking about docks and slips. That's a huge topic. I've personally not met geographic-based opinions that are greater than docks and slips. It's truly, even, in my neighborhood, two lakes that aren't that far apart, just completely different worlds. So I think it's going to be a challenge, but at the same time, to me, that says this is a great place for standards, to really push that envelope and try and bring those worlds together. And then bulk sales. Right now, we're discussing with Kevin and Lucy around a field idea they have, and we may settle on just that. But where this could go and where we're looking for people to come forward with what they have is, do you have additional dimension around bulk sales? And that would look something like one listing where you've got actually attributes, like multiple records of different properties that are all under the one listing. So do you have beds and baths and square footages and all that for each of the properties that are sitting on the one listing? So seeing if there's that dimension of a collection of an adjacent table for those things where you can have many properties under one listing. We need participation from those who actually have that. That would definitely warrant a full subgroup. Otherwise, we might just come up with some summary recommendations and bring them into the work group. So we're going to be pending people coming forward on that one. And then good friend of mine, Bill, new construction guy, actually talked him into heading up new construction group. But there's a lot of need here. There you are. There are unique things, and there are construction systems, new construction systems. So we're just starting to drum up participation. We want to get multiple systems involved and really see what it is that we've got that's unique and different that needs standardization. This one is NARs, give them the biggest feed so they don't have to have multiple feeds. I'm personally convinced we can't solve the problem, but maybe we can come up with some things to help with regards to that. So I've got somebody that's got an IDX feed, VOW, and like a PDAP, a broker's own, right? Which has got special criteria. How do you cover that PDAP and VOW at the same time? Expiration date is a really good point to that, right? That's kind of hitting a wall. I think at the end of the day, that's got to be contractual. Technically, you can't send some sort of little virus into their system that will hide the expiration date or something, that's, kind of nonsensical. But I still think at the end of the day, there's potential here. So we don't have a group lead. It's just a back burner that, we could have more conversations on. So if you want to have a discussion on that front, contact me and we can chat more about it. So anybody have any thoughts on this? This is almost a blank canvas. We've got NAR policy and whatever we want to try and do to help. All right. And then building. So I was first contacted about building from somebody who has their competitor to, the camera systems that you put in, and they take the 3D photos of the inside of the house. And they were definitely needing to track property, right? Like a campus, building, floor, unit, as all independently having their own attributes, right? And we really didn't have a lot of competitors coming together to create a standard, so it sort of went off to the wayside. It's definitely being implemented in places like New York. So if you have that dimension, if you have attributes around buildings or attributes around floors, right? Because the listing is kind of flat. A listing can be a building, right? Nobody lists a floor. Maybe they do. But really having these related dimensions is what this discussion's about. This one is definitely got, some legs. So if you have something like this, get involved because it's going to roll forward. And I want to say thank you to the group leads. This structure of the dictionary work group, really leaning on subject matter experts and those willing to have their own, their own corner of the process, is fantastic. There's no way the old group would be able to cover as much stuff at the same time. And I think also, tell me if I'm wrong, but being in a group where it's much more about subjects you have a stake in and not having a lot of topics that you don't, hopefully is better use of your time. And that's definitely something I respect, being a volunteer myself. Okay, broker attribution. Definitely at our last meeting, this is kind of your more normal work group topic. So those of you who are new, this is kind of like a window into the process of what the work group does when we have an item on the table. And this has been posted out in Confluence for a couple months. So check, meets that qualification. Multiple implementations, definitely check, because it's a requirement from NAR. When you look at the requirements from NAR, don't just read the short version, read their FAQ. There's definition in that FAQ that in the main rule is not even alluded to. So make sure you grab that and take a look at it, because it's going to tell you you've got to offer choice to the broker. You got to offer some control to the broker. And talk to others. There's some really cool, clever implementations going on as well, where brokers even can kind of delegate choice about this contact information. So a lot of cool ideas. The thing we clarified at the last meeting was that we're talking about how this attribution, which the NAR policy says an email or a phone number, how it's surfaced. If you take this and put it in your input form, you're making a big mistake. Because one, there are a lot of brokers who are not going to want to go in and fill out this field on every one of their listings. And if you leave it up to the agents, you're not giving the broker choice. And a lot of agents are going to put in their contact information, and then the brokers are going to call you up saying, what are you doing? This is a broker choice. Look at the NAR policy. So keep that in mind. All right, there was definitely some discussion around that. Your implementation can be whatever you want it to be, but essentially once that choice has been made, and however you decide to do it, it'll be surfaced as a single field called attribution contact. It's a string field, it's 80 characters long. And some people say, well, what if I put both in there? Whatever, you got 80 characters, whatever you want to do. Policy says or, but I don't read it as it says you can't do and, but this is the field that we have proposed. It's well vetted and it's ready to go up for a vote. So in order to move forward before discussion, we need to have a motion and a second from the group. We have a motion. Who is the first second there? We want to record that. So we've got John, and then who is the second? Stephanie. Who's on second? Third base. All right. Discussion. Yeah.
What happens with data update? So the broker makes a change to what they want, their preferences for what information they want included.
Mm-hmm.
You have to retroactively go back and edit every single listing that the broker has. Has the work group discussed this?
I don't recall us discussing it. I definitely understand. Does everybody understand what he's talking about? If this is flat on your listings, right? And then anyone who subsequently consumes it, it's going to be flat most likely, right? And that's where you got this big impact where if the broker just goes ahead and changes it. Now, NAR policy and so far RESO doesn't have a stance on that. So could you push them all and update for every single listing? You could. Or could you make it your policy where this is only retroactive, so your design that's only on new listings? And if they want to change existing, they got to manually go to them. It's up to your implementation. And this is just me talking. Any other thoughts around that? I had a hand over here, and then I'll come to you, John.
Yeah, hi, Adam Beckerman at Compass. Having one field that could be two different things is a little bit tricky. Could we consider attribution phone and attribution email separately, and they can be typed appropriately?
So kind of the business case, or the case behind that is my understanding, and definitely feel free to correct me with your thoughts, is that when you're consuming data, knowing what it's going to be, you can do things like create links. All right, and this is literally my thinking. I'm a broker, and I've got an IDX website, and I'm putting the listing broker's phone number on my listing. Why do I want a link? NAR doesn't say I need it. I just want dumb, flat data. And quite literally, in my mind, that's the best justification I can come up with. Now, the group did vet it out, and the group essentially has gone in this direction. If there's a desire to halt and maybe rethink it, we certainly can. But right now, we've got a motion and a second, so we would need to actually vote it down if we want to change it. So is there a desire to, do you want to, push for that? Okay, yeah. We'd need to actually vote on it, but if you want to speak more towards that, you can. So if you could do me a favor and withdraw that. Okay, and then we're gonna go ahead and vote it up or vote it down.
The microphones are here for you guys, so feel free to step up if you want to discuss. Yes, thank you. We're also live streaming this to the audience who's not here. So if you can come up to the microphones with any questions, any discussion, please do.
All right. Anyone else speak in favor or against?
I'll just offer some commentary on the question about that. Most browsers these days can tell the difference between a phone number and an email. I think that I agree with what Rob's proposing here, because I think that we don't really want to give the agent another possibility for making a wrong choice. So if we say, oh, this is a phone, but he provides an email, that screws you up even more. If you don't have any predisposition on what that field is, and you look at, let's say, a regular expression, you go, oh, this is an email, you do whatever you want. If it's a phone number, you do whatever you want. And as Rob put it, it's up to the implementation. So you can literally do what you want. And it's a fairly well-known and utilized model to have regular expressions, and just let it go out the door. And again, as Rob said, there's no reason that you have to do any of those things either, right? You can just be text if that's what you want it to be. So I think having the type is just totally superfluous and only provides a possible error. So that's my opinion there.
Okay. Yes, Gail.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding the attribution contact field. If we have an attribution contact field, there's nothing in the data dictionary that would prohibit us from having an attribution contact to. That if we wanted to separate that out in our own and do it our own way, we could and still pass data dictionary, correct?
If you wanted to pass two of them, I would say the spirit is kind of broken if attribution contact is null and attribution 2 has something in it. Aside from that, yeah, the dictionary is extensible, and I'm even going to cover that today.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, so we're going to use hands. I don't know if we have facility to include online, but we definitely have well beyond what we consider a quorum. Not that we actually have an official number for that. But we're going to go ahead and do a raise of hands, and we're going to do our best to, kind of guesstimate the numbers here. So again, you'll be raising your hand if you're in favor of this field as stated. If you think it should be done a different way, or you just don't like it at all, then you're going to want to vote against this. And then if it gets voted down, then we would bring a discussion of a different way of handling it back to the group. All right, so all those in favor of adding this field as stated, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm guesstimating we're somewhere in the order of about 50 there. Go ahead and lower your hands. And those against, please raise your hand. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so probably about 10, maybe 12. So definitely the ayes have it. All right. Those of you who are new, that's how it works. Pretty straightforward. All right. Gross living area. This one I want to throw a caveat in right out of the gate that we do have an appraisal group. This came in independent of that group. That group is a little focused in other areas, and then this topic came up. So I think it's still appropriate for us to go ahead and vote on this and follow our process. But I would also go ahead and add the caveat that the appraisal group will take a look at this, and if they decide it's an issue, then they can punt back, right, and say, hold on, we want to propose something different. But if they don't, then we're done and we don't have to look at it again. Does that seem reasonable? Is anybody against that little, hopefully not having to look at it again thing? All right, I'll take that as an okay. All right, so desktop appraisal, if you haven't heard about it, definitely a hot topic. And now we're all looking at this ANSI standard. Went out and bought myself a copy of it so I could take a look at it. A lot of discussion around this. There's some appraisers. I have an appraiser friend who's almost like, I'd say, hot under the collar about the notion of kind of what's going on here. At the end of the day, it's fun to talk about that, but I don't know that unless it's really pertinent to our job, which is adding a field to the dictionary, I don't think we should get caught up in that conversation-wise. Maybe at the bar later. So try to govern yourself a little bit to the thought of the implementation is that we've already got these different square foot fields, and these area fields that we have source, right? And have, whether it's feet or whether it's metric, right? This one doesn't, because this one is defined by the ANSI standard. So it just is what it is. It's a single numeric field. The 14 just comes from existing fields that we had in the dictionary, which I think is way more than we'd ever need. It's a business rule anyway. We don't have a source field. And then here's the ANSI standard that we would include in the definition to say if you're going to populate this field, you need to follow this standard. Okay, no initial reaction. So we'll go ahead and move on. Does somebody want to make a motion in a second? We got John. Second. Someone? Cass. Thank you. Okay, discussion. I'll reiterate, this is with the caveat that it is going to go past the appraisal subgroup. But that's just for, they can either push it back to us or do nothing and it'll go through. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Hello.
Hey, Rob. Can you just explain quickly how this field would be different from the living area field and the building total square foot field that we already have?
Exactly. Definitely part of the discussion, makes total sense to me. Personally, I kind of had thoughts, well, let's just add that as a source pick list, that this source is the ANSI standard, but then there could be multiple sources doing the ANSI standard, et cetera. So I think at the end of the day, the recommendations and the sum of the discussion, if you take a look online in Confluence, you'll see some of that, really comes down to this thing should be called out on its own because it's part of this new process, and there may be other square footage measurements that get used, and say you're doing something that's not the ANSI standard, having a comfortability that the ANSI standard field is null and the other one is populated. I get that, you know. I'm trying to remember, does anybody recall any other kind of justifications for the separate field? But I think it's really to put the emphasis on the standard. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Yeah, I hate redundancy, but it kind of makes sense. Any other discussion? All right. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Let's see here. We've got about 17, maybe 18. All right, hands down. And all those against, please raise your hand. I got 2, 3. All right, the ayes have it. Okay. So I don't even know what I think about this, and I kind of want to get more and more feedback. I've been talking to different people. I think the first important caveat to this is that we're not talking about in the transport, in the transaction of the data, less information. We're not talking about more vanilla. We're talking about more definition. And we're also, I'm not thinking that we're talking about any kind of a change to the transport other than there would be more resources available. And one simple way to look at it is, okay, IDX is payload. And if you say IDX is a resource, it's a little weird because sometimes IDX has got roster in it. So maybe that doesn't work so well. So there's sort of the gotcha to it. But then, you know, the flip side is that, well, in tax, pretty much laying on top of property as it is, and yeah, we might have some other, you know, ancillary data collections to that. But what do we do with this overlap? Do we just keep adding resources and try to keep all the stuff in sync? You know, we do occasionally run into mistakes because it's not all kind of sourcing from the same bucket. And then so, not so much in transport, but maybe in how the dictionary is put together, do we put everything in one bucket and then use like payloads, resources as lenses? Right, if you will. Now to the actual transport and the transaction, there's no lens. It's just a resource. It is what it is. But with how the dictionary is together, maybe we can put it together in a way where mechanically it's much easier to, you know, if we're reusing a field called modification timestamp, it's actually just once in there. And if we update the definition, it gets updated in every resource. Right now, if we change that, Jason and I got to make sure we catch every one of them, right? So there's some of the justification. And this may be just a very deep under the hood dictionary thing, but I think it's an opportunity for us to talk about, well, what are our resources? How are we communicating payloads? As a data consumer, how do you know you're getting an IDX payload? Well, it's probably because you signed an IDX contract, but there's nothing there mechanically for you to latch on to say, this is IDX, I've now got these expectations. Does that have any value? So I'd love to hear some thoughts and input and a discussion on this. And I'm not going anywhere until somebody talks, because this thing is keeping me up at night, driving me crazy. So what do you think? Come on. Yeah. All right. How about putting in a question around, say, tax? Should tax be its own resource? Completely separate? Okay. How about IDX? So that one's a little like, Paul?
I have a question, practical question around this. If we're putting it all in one bucket, how do we handle things that have the same dictionary meaning, like a timestamp, but goes across multiple resources? That's separated out now because those resources are expanded into other resources. If it's all in one bucket, are you proposing that we have unique names for each of the timestamps, each of the address fields, each of the city fields, property.city, agent.city? Otherwise, we're going to have namespace collisions and we won't be able to transport this. So that, to me, that is the question that jumps to me is, are you now proposing that every dictionary name is unique if it's in this one bucket?
That's a good point, and I'm already sort of settled in my thinking on how this would surface. Would be to use city, for example, member.city, office.city, property.city, that those would surface, their namespaces would all be different. They would surface as different, right? Like they do today. But underneath that, and maybe not even exposed to what, the community leverages the dictionary when they leverage it as sort of a schema, that it's surfaced as broken out. And this might just wind up being a completely under the hood thing that's absolutely transparent to everybody except Jason and I.
Right, so that you would be doing more like the semantic meaning of city is this, and this is how we define a city, and it's used all these other places, but the namespace is what we're actually exposing, whether that's agent.city or it's in the agent resource and it's the city field in that resource. Are you concerned that this might result in different implementations going forward if we're changing the way that resources have been exposed right now? People have built data dictionary implementations that use the resources. Will this impact those people who've already done this work long term?
I mean, if it does, we need to make sure that's on the table. I think if we go with this simplest thing where Jason and I are the only one that notice, then I wouldn't be concerned about that happening. We should be watchful, but I don't think it would impact anyone. For me, if we go this sort of more simplest route, it would be for a convenience and a consistency sake. And the only time we get in trouble is when we decided that, oh, well, city and underneath member needs to be this, and city underneath property needs to be something different. But then we could just create another field in that bottom layer that sort of feeds everything. But I'm kind of hoping that there might be something that could surface more that would be of use here. I don't know what it is.
All right, thank you. Just keep it in mind.
Will do. Any other thoughts about this? How about just that simple, we're just going to use this to make sure we're more consistent with the dictionary? Well, actually, since Mark's come up.
Yeah, I just want to bring out this idea, and I know on the groups, and I've heard Rob talk about this before, and it's made me think too. I think we need to graduate ourselves to the idea that we should start entertaining the notion of objects, right? So if you have a piece of tax information like a deed, that's an object. It's got its own members. It's got things that make the deed, the attributes that make this a deed. We have a listing. This is what screws everybody up. We have a listing. There's lots of things in our listing. Database is 700 fields long or more, right? And they're labeled all kinds of weird ways. And, I have room 1, room 2, room 3. And, it's very, very denormalized. If we have this notion of objects, then we can do things, and this is where, when we were talking before, when I was talking to Rob before, about payloads and lenses, where it really resonated with me is that if you have a listing, if you have a listing and you think in terms of a lens and you say, okay, this is the, and I think listing should be a giant, by the way, a different JSON, the JSON I like, JSON. But anyway.
That's why he was hired.
But anyway, so the idea is that if you have this structure that's an object, it has its own schema, then things like lenses and payloads make a lot of sense. So what I've done in the past and currently is that if somebody says, I want to see a listing, okay, listing, like, what do you want to see? You want to see IDX? An IDX listing? And that's already manifested. Or do you want to see, it's kind of a projection. If you can think of you have a listing with 700 fields long, and I want to project that, though, into just this IDX object that represents that listing. That's an example. Val, same thing. You can do that with listings. Makes a lot of sense to have these lenses. Tax, well, maybe. I don't know. I have to do deeper thinking on tax, but I'm sure that same model applies. But I think we've got this thing in our head that says a listing is this giant piece of stuff. It's all, there's no hierarchy to it. It's just one level. And I think that's what kind of screws us up. So anyway, food for thought that maybe we start talking about these things as objects, because the data dictionary does a great job of telling us what all these fields are, but it doesn't necessarily give us the context of a field. So, like, for example, what went through my head on the last piece, and why I kind of voted it down, was that now we're talking about ANSI. And ANSI's got this, the gross living area. Great. Maybe we should have a node in that listing that says ANSI measurements. And we fill in that ANSI measurements node with all the measurements that ANSI has. And I mean, I'm just throwing out the top of my head. But that's the kind of thing that becomes available to us if we start thinking about all these artifacts, all these entities in terms of an object definition. And so, anyway, food for thought.
Thank you. Eric.
I may say something that might be a little unpopular for a second, but I'm going to throw it out there. So I think it might be time. I mean, I've been just like you. This has been going through our head because we work with brokerages and we have this entire problem, right? Is we need this feed and we need this feed and we need this agreement and that agreement. And oh, this is changing. And oh, now everybody wants to go to VOW because of the display requirements of the broker attribution. And so now VOW is coming back around. The lenses is a very interesting concept to me because you already do that in the data feed, right? So we already sort of do that with IDX yes or no, and VOW yes or no, and all of those other feeds. So it's kind of something similar to that process. Mm-hmm. But I think it's time for, we're at a point now where there's an NAR mandate for one feed to rule them all, or whatever you want to call it, right? And yep. I think it's time for MLSs to start considering a new agreement type that is specific to brokers. That's not just broker back office. It's not just their listings. It's not just IDX. It's not having to worry about that. It's a new type that says, hey, look, you're a broker and we're going to kind of trust you to use the data how you see fit. Because if a broker signs a VOW agreement and they sign a broker back office agreement, et cetera, they already essentially have everything coming through the feed at that point. So what about a new agreement type that's everything? Where, we've got 20 years of history of vendors and things like that, and most vendors play nicely with the data and do the right things. And when one of you sends a letter and says, hey, you're doing this wrong, if you're a good vendor, you say, oops, we'll fix that in 30 seconds for you. We are very, very sorry, right? So what about giving the vendor or giving at least the broker the option for the one feed that has everything, truly everything, and then either having lenses or in the agreement with the vendor or the broker, it outlines more explicitly than a lot of the agreements do today. These are the things you can do if it's on a public website. These are the things you can do if it's behind a registration, VOW registration, and here's the things you can do with your own data. But a new agreement type that has literally everything in one feed, and then the agreement always, it seems like that's much easier as an implementation to meet the NAR requirement today to change an agreement than to change every single feed, every web API feed, and have to turn on a lens for every single feed.
Definitely. I think there's a lot of different things that are sort of, at least with me, that are stirring. Even like one of the oldest ones, when we sat there and argued over whether we were going to call the resource listing or property, we called it property, and half the room didn't like it. It was like one of those split vote things, and at the end of the day, it was just like, we just got to make our mind and move on. Well, I don't know. I mean, somebody want to be able to say, hey, these fields are listing, and maybe that fact is an attribute. I don't know. Maybe a resource is called listing versus property? Sergio.
Yeah, I'd just like to go back to what exactly you're proposing. So it sounds to me like what you're saying is you're just going to have a dictionary that is a list of all the possible fields, and then each of the resources, objects, whatever you want to call them, is going to refer to this more giant list, and that way you have consistency across all the different resources. Is that correct?
Maybe. I've got like these little problems, and I'm trying to create this holistic, beautiful solution. You know, it's like, yeah, right. But
that sounds
I
like
still
a
want to go
reasonable
for it.
idea.
Yeah. Any other input? Yep.
I like this concept of having a single list of distinct fields, assuming that those distinct fields don't mean different things in different resources, right? Modification timestamps being one of the easy ones to pick out there. But when we think of resources, let's take property and member. We think of them as relational, right? There can be many members on a property. When we get the data today, at least the majority of data we see, a lot of that member data sits on the property data as it is today, like LA1, LA2, selling agent 1, selling agent 2. And we seem to be very flat with the data in that aspect, and we don't go beyond. Some MLSs do go beyond the SA1, SA2 kind of things. So I still think resources are very relational, and I think of them in web API format on kind of an expand. And then the payloads definitely being that lens of what we get access to. I echo what Eric says. I think we all would love to have that, Eric. We also shouldn't let Eric at the mic anymore. No, these things are impossible, Eric. No, I mean, it would be great for us to have that trust, that level of trust. I think we would love to have that as well. But when we think of this payloads, we also think of what data we have access to, not just an IDX, yes or no. We would love that there be that level of trust to be able to filter that data on our own as well. Yeah. So
cool, thank you. I mean, at minimum, I want to walk away with this with some mechanics that Jason and I do that nobody can see. To make us better at keeping your hard work up to date and in line. But I would really like to see us provide more definition out to those consuming data. And I think we can. You know, just the idea around payloads is that there's more definition around existing resources, right? And we don't have a fixed way that we're presenting that yet. And maybe that's all we do with this, but I think while we're at this point that, you know, taking this little esoteric trip down the road of who knows what we might do with it is a conversation I intend to continue to have. We're not in a race to change everything. You know, stability is key, but I think we have problems to solve here, and I just want to get us to circle in on those And maybe we'll start with just kind of itemizing that kind of stuff. A lot of our problems are obvious and we take them for granted. I think this one is a pretty broad topic, so I think that'll be my next steps. All right. This kind of falls under the same umbrella, but this is really a more straightforward discussion. We have these groups of enumerations we call a lookup, right? We very intentionally decided that interior or room features was a lookup that was going to be used by the room features field and by the interior features field. 2 fields, 1 batch of lookups. Done. If you want to change that, you're going to need to post something in Confluence and argue against it. Or member designation has separate lookup groups over and over. So this is the question. If you really don't like interior room being together, then you're going to want to say, hey, keep member designation the way it is. But for us, having member designation over and over, so far I can't see any reason why you need separate lookup groups for them, because the list of designations is exactly the same. So we do need to get a post up. No vote today. A post is coming. Think about what that might do to you if we go one way or the other. Okay, so the conversation, hopefully we'll have it up in the next few days or so. Maybe talk a little bit about it at the next regular meeting. This kind of is in line with my whole thing around payloads and resources, is that, to me, very early on in the discussion of having a square payload, having fixed fields, and thou shalt not violate the cube of metadata, does not work in our industry. One of the early attempts at that meant that in this particular area for this particular feed, I would have to give them the feed. Nobody would use it. I would give them another feed because it would have the fields that they absolutely critically could not survive without. Literally, the vendors producing their product in this area without this particular field that wasn't in that square payload were done, right? Unequivocal. So I even had my solution. So that doesn't really work. Extensibility works, right? We just kind of have to. We can't be all things to everyone, right? And we have to not make everybody roll out every field in the dictionary. It's a game of percentiles. We're trying to cover what 90% of us all use in common. That's a standard. What we do unique, we don't need a standard for it, right? This personal philosophy that's kind of stitched through the notion of the dictionary over time. Is there anything we can do with this payloads and resources and lenses and all this kind of stuff that maybe we can help express, Right now, we don't really have a good fixed way, whether it's a local field or whether it's a standard field, right? People are doing it in different ways. So there's definitely part of a conversation there, right? But I wanted to make sure that people were clear because these situations come up. The dictionary is not your back end. Do not take the dictionary, hand it to your vendor, and say, make this my back end. Don't do it. Now, tomorrow we're going to have a discussion about native, and I'll be sitting at that round table because I've done it. That's different, right? But not to go down the native route. The dictionary is there for the transport of the data to create expectations and minimize the work that has to be done for the people who are consuming it, and to make life better for the people who are delivering it because they don't have yet another vendor who's done it wrong and they're getting yelled at because everything's in the wrong field or whatever the problem is. You can always, exactly. You can add what you need, but you got to make sure that it's not already in the dictionary and it's conceptual. It's not that the field name didn't exactly match. You need to understand the fields, and if you have something that's basically the same thing, you're kind of on the hook, even though testing might not catch you and you might get away with it forever. The spirit of the dictionary is find that same concept and then do it the dictionary way. If it's not there, do whatever you want. And same thing, if there's something in the dictionary you don't use, don't put it in your system. Now, you can certainly present it to your people and say, hey, this is in the national standard. And they might surprise you. They might say, that's freaking awesome. I've wanted that all my life. Or maybe not. So anyhow, talk to me. If you're doing an implementation and you're not crystal clear on kind of where your duty lies to your constituents, to your members, and you're not clear where the lines are and what you need to do to best serve the dictionary, we'll be talking about native. It's an implementation discussion. The impacts, the costs, all those things of changing from native tomorrow. And this is a conversation that at any time down the road, even after I'm long gone, send an email into info@RESO. Make sure you talk to your peers. Make sure you're clear, because the costs of change are very high. And you want to be really solid with what you're doing before you turn to your vendor and say, do this. And then all your consumers of your data have to deal with that, right? Just remember, it has a ripple effect, change does. Okay, 2.0. Here's what we got done. So we got a couple hundred fields, over 100 lookups. We got the resources listed there, some great work. The association work was awesome. We had, the big AMS vendors at the table. A lot of good participation in that group. Entity events is was more of a technical thing that came out of other groups that's gone forward. Lockboxes, and it's lock or box because it's not just lockboxes anymore, it's smart locks as well. We actually had a vendor who created a solution that leveraged smart locks to do the exact same lockbox type of functionality. I think that's something that's potentially going to grow dramatically. We have the new field and lookup resources. So when you go to RETS, you pull metadata. When you go into OData, you get the schema out of it. This is another way to get it. And consult transport on what's required, what's not. Dictionary just has the definition for it. But it does abstract the metadata from OData. I think it's my favorite way to get metadata, because I can interrogate in all sorts of ways without even having to pull the data down. I can just run queries and get counts against things off of servers. I think that's pretty slick. And then we've got some deprecations. We used to have key and key numeric, right? Trying to add like a rule or definition to a field, where at the end of the day, when you're consuming data from another source, you don't necessarily need that. I mean, at the end of the day, when I was consuming keys from the outside, I always put it in a string field, because it doesn't matter what they call it. You need to be able to expect it, and it's foreign. It's not my local key my database needs to run on. So there were definitely more folks deeper in the tech community and transport if you have any questions around that deprecation. You don't have to take it away, because if the dictionary doesn't do it and you do it, you can. But if you have key numeric and you don't have key, watch out. Certification testing is going to catch you at some point. If not right now, I don't know. All right, got a couple minutes left. And anything else you want to talk about? Anything else for the good of the order? We have 2 minutes and 28 seconds. All right, we're done. Thank you all for your time. Talk to you next month.